Matters is a learning platform inspired and conceptualized by Dr. Casey Bradley. And the idea is to create something that enables students and animal science professionals alike to build and network, share and ask questions, and pretty much ease the shift from academe while exploring the range of work and the various paths that are to define success in animal health and nutrition and its related industries. So today, diversity is our topic. As per Merriam-Webster's dictionary, it's defined as the condition of having or being composed of differing elements. I'm sure we'll all agree that diversity is everywhere these days. Diversity works in multiple layers and brings its own pros and cons. So it's really an experience. Today, we are joined by three technical experts, Dr. Beth Krunshinskie, Dr. Victor Perez, and Dr. Joshua Jendza. So to give you a quick overview of each of our guests for today, Dr. Beth Krunshinskie is a senior technical advisor at Food Safety Risk Management Consulting, LLC. She has over 20 years of experience in the US and in international poultry, with an emphasis in live production and processing, quality management, and foodborne pathogen prevention and control. Beth has been the Director of Technical Services for Allen Harim and Director of Quality Assurance for Monterre Farms. Now, on a global level, Beth has also spent a few years overseas as Director of Technical Services for the Ingram Group in Sydney, Australia. She currently also sits as Vice President for Food Safety and Production Programs with the U.S. Poultry and Egg Association. Dr. Victor Perez is originally from Mexico. Prior to moving to the U.S., Vic had 8 years of experience working his way up from a production manager role. He obtained a scholarship and then went to earn his Ph.D. in animal science at the University of Illinois. Professionally, Vic got his start as a scientific researcher. And then from there, he's been able to expand that responsibility to have interactions with the users of that information. So from technical services people to sales, and then directly with the customers. Vic has worked with companies like ADM, Pancosma, and DuPont. And he's traveled to various places in North and South America, Europe, and Asia as well. And Dr. Joshua Jendza, he is a classically trained swine nutritionist with 8 years of experience working in both poultry and in swine. As a technical product manager with BASF, Josh creates new value propositions and marketing strategies for organic and formic acids and mycotoxins. He is one of 3 individuals at BASF that provides technical and product marketing support to 4 global regions. That's the US, Canada, Europe, and Asia. He's very comfortable doing technical sales, and he does this on a global level. Josh has a lot of experience in dealing with and selecting distributors. He's launched products into the US and is the guy responsible for building BASF's formic acid US data. And he's done this from scratch. So Josh works with pigs, broilers, layers, and very recently he started doing business with an integrated duck producer. So to shed more light and their professional experiences on the topic of diversity, please welcome Beth, Vic, and Josh. Thanks for joining us today, guys.
Thank you, Trish.
Ladies first.
I think. Oh, all right. You know, my screen just changed, so I'm not sure. The presentation went away, I guess. Okay, well, thank you, Trish, and thank you, Casey, for inviting me to participate today. And I have to say, I'm really impressed with the effort that you guys have put in to develop this Coffee and Careers. I actually bragged about you to my daughter, who is in the leadership role working with the University of San Diego Conscious Leadership Academy, and said, you need to look at this, and maybe it's something that you should see if you can emulate with your students over there in the University of San Diego in California. So I won't take up too much time, but be open for questions. I started my career, I went to veterinary school in 1983, so I hate to say how old I am, and graduated in 87. And I did a couple of years of small animal practice, and really, that wasn't really where my heart was. I worked in a diagnostic lab at the University of North Dakota State University in Fargo, North Dakota, of all places, as an undergrad. And so my heart was really in virology and in animal health issues, food animals. So after I did a couple years stint in small animal practice, I had the opportunity to go back to graduate school at the University of Minnesota and work on avian influenza in turkeys, which was a very big deal in the late 80s and early 90s. After that, I joined a vaccine company, Solve Animal Health, which is now Perez, and had some exposure to poultry health internationally, which was very helpful. And then I kind of skipped around poultry companies, just being recruited for different roles. But ultimately, I ended up being at one point, the only female broiler veterinarian in the US industry. And I was the first president of the the American Association of Avian Pathologists back in the day. So when you talk about diversity, I think, 20 to 25 years ago, being a female in agriculture was especially being a poultry veterinarian, was a pretty uphill climb. I used to say that I had a lot of knobs on my head from hitting the glass ceiling. But I think you just have to persevere through that and realize that you just sometimes have to run faster and jump higher than the boys do, to get ahead and to really be recognized for your accomplishments and for your capabilities, rather than just for being, a token female in that kind of work environment. I think on diversity, my career is actually, I've had a lot of really, really interesting experiences, worked for a lot of great companies, had a lot of international travel, especially to the third world. I spent 2 years, I had the opportunity to work for the US Agency for International Development on the big bird flu outbreak. And I worked extensively with the governments of former Soviet Union countries around the Black Sea on their preparedness and planning pandemic. They were worried about a pandemic flu at that time from bird flu. So we worked on identification, response, and preparedness training, and worked with World Trade Organization and with World Bank to fund some of this laboratory infrastructure improvement and things like that. So your career may go in all kinds of directions that you cannot see today. I have 2 daughters. I tell them you kind of have to pick a path, and you're sort of like you're climbing a hill. And when you get to the top of the hill, then you'll see what the land looks like on the other side of the hill, and you'll have a choice of roads to go down at that point. My biggest recommendation, I think, is for people to be confident in yourself, be willing to learn, always be humble, always know that you've got so much more that you don't know, and be open to opportunities and be willing to jump. I was pretty comfortable in a position with Mount Air Farms here on the Eastern Shore. Been there 8 years. I got an email request from a recruiter, wasn't Trish, it was someone else, about an executive position with this poultry company in Australia that I'd never heard of. Didn't know anything about the position, didn't know anything about the company. Long story short, I ended up accepting the role, quit the job that I was very comfortable with, packed up, moved to Australia, spent 2 years there, learned a tremendous amount, had a wonderful time. That was a transition project, came back from that. And I think the biggest difference between my career and many of my colleagues is that I was willing to try something new, and I was willing to get out of my comfort zone. I was willing to really make some big transitions in life if the opportunity arose. So that's kind of my advice. Be open-minded. It's a journey, and really, it's kind of like Forrest Gump, it's a box of chocolates, and you really don't know what's going to come up opportunities for you. So just be open-minded, try to go with the flow rather than trying to control the situation, and realize that it's really based on your merit in your ability to work with people and your ability to learn new things and to be flexible. So that's kind of my motherly advice, I guess, for students. So I hope that helps.
Great advice. I see Vic next to my window, so I'm going to let you go next.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Casey and Trish, for the invite. I think it's great to be part of this amazing project you are, taking underway here. I think it's a great value. So as a way of introduction, I will say I was born and raised in central Mexico to a conservative family in a conservative city in one of the more conservative states in Mexico. So basically, I grew up learning to dislike pretty much everything that didn't look like me. Until I became a minority as an international student in Illinois. Then it took a complete different perspective things there. And so I would like to start putting a rhetorical question that I want you to think about as we go through this conversation, which is, what is the level of diversity you are surrounded by? And I think that's important because I believe that it really doesn't matter if you consider yourself open to diversity or respectful toward diversity. I think what makes the difference is the sensitivity we show toward diversity. And so that's a practice. It's not a concept to adopt. And in order to practice that, it's basically using empathy, tolerance, and respect. And to do that, we require a diverse environment. Otherwise, it just doesn't happen. And I want to make the point sharing a personal experience. About 4.5 years ago, the presidential elections were ongoing, and there was quite a bit of buzz in the air about Mexicans being the bad guys. And at that time, my daughter was a first grader. She was in this Catholic school, really nice community. And, she knew that she was Mexican as well as American because she was born here. But she was fully aware. And so at some point, she decided not to speak Spanish anymore outside home. And well, that was disappointing, but I understood. She was in this school, about 150 students, a Catholic community, very nice people. And they were open to diversity. They welcomed diversity. So they had a couple of Black American boys, foster kids in a white family, a Chinese girl adopted by a white family, another girl, half Filipino, half American, and my Mexican daughter. That was pretty much about the diversity in the environment. Everybody else was pretty much white. And so I understood what my daughter wanted to do was just to fit in that environment. It was, again, a really nice community, and we actually share the Catholic values with them, but they were not pretty much sensitive to diversity. Now, fast forward about 3 years, we're living in a different city. She goes to another school, and this school celebrates diversity. Now, to honor that, they actually keep a quite diverse student base in the school. And by the end of the first year in that school, her classroom is hosting an activity with parents. So I'm there with my daughter, speaking to her in English. And then she stops me and says, "Hey, Dad, I want you to speak to me in Spanish because I am Latina." So it really met my heart. But beyond that, she was trying to do exactly the same thing than in the first situation. She was trying to fit in. It's interesting because it goes in complete opposite directions. But what happened here is, it's a small group where she was at, I think about 14 students, and her closer group of friends were this American girl that happened to be African American, a Kenyan American, a Chinese American, a British American, and her. And if you think in a group of 14 kids, about half of them boys, so this is 5 out of 7 girls in a classroom, and that may well represent the diversity in the school. So it's a totally different environment, so that by trying to fit in, now having a different background is a way to do it. So it changes the perspective completely. So again, if you think in a work environment as well, you may be, in situations where everybody's alike, been in meetings where I'm the only foreign one in the room, versus environments where pretty much everybody across the room comes from a different country. And, you can tell everybody could be very professional, very respectful, but that level of diversity is what brings the sensitivity to the group. So keep thinking about that as we go through the talk.
So I guess that would mean I'm up next. I am not a minority in any definition. I'm a white male born and raised in America, but I have had a lot of experience observing the value of diversity kind of from really close next door. So when I was younger in grade school, I went to a school where white students were actually the minority. It wasn't that there was a larger particular minority group, but it was a very diverse elementary school with a lot of immigrant groups from Europe and from Central America. And that was interesting because the community I lived in was predominantly white, but the school that I attended, there was a lot of diversity. So a lot of exposure to different people who spoke different languages, came from different cultural backgrounds that I hadn't been exposed to up until that point. And then fast forward a few years, I attended Purdue University for my graduate degrees, and I worked in a lab for a professor who was originally from Nigeria, trained in Canada. And I think in the 8 years I was there was only 3 Americans as graduate students in that lab. So there was a lot of exposure to people from different countries and different backgrounds, different educational focuses. And that really kind of opened my eyes to the value of diversity, because they all brought something to the table that I couldn't have brought simply because of where I was from and what I had been exposed to growing up. My postdoc, I worked for a gentleman who was originally from Ghana, again, Canadian trained, in a lab with mostly international graduate students. And then 8 years ago, I came to join BASF, where I work now, in a company that's ultimately a German in character. It's a German company headquartered in Ludwigshafen, Germany, and most of the management is German. But it's also a company that has placed a very high importance on diversity. So when we have our annual kind of checklist as to how the company's doing, there's only 5 or 6 things that everybody has to talk about. And one of those is, how is the company doing in terms of diversity? And actually, I saw today, we just won a new award for diversity and representation of management within the company. I just posted it on LinkedIn when I found out, because it timed really well with this talk here. I think that, and then in the time that I've worked here, I mean, the team I've worked with has been research scientists from Belgium, from Germany, from Mexico. Working with people in my current role, I support teams all around the world, working with customers and colleagues in Asia and Europe and Latin America. And I think that animal nutrition as an industry, even though we're in the animal production industry and people in America tend to think of the Midwest and the South as being very kind of uniform, I think that within the animal nutrition industry itself, there's a lot of acceptance of diversity and candidates from a diverse background, because ultimately we're looking to produce animals, and we're looking to make money, and we're looking to get the best people. And oftentimes that means people, people from a different country with a different background. And as long as you can do the job and do it well, I've seen a lot more acceptance of that than I probably would have expected 10 years ago when I was first breaking into the industry. So I think as a kind of the kind of the white guy on the panel here, if I'll say, be a little blunt, I think that there's a lot of opportunity for those who are in the animal nutrition industry to actually break into industry, as opposed to feeling like you have to stay in academia where it's a little bit safer. And to Beth's comment on being open to opportunities, I think that is huge. My original application to graduate school was to work in dairy nutrition, and I ended up getting accepted into a swine nutrition program. And no swine background, no particular interest in pigs or chickens. And I think one of the best decisions I ever made was accepting that offer and going to Purdue, meeting the people I met, learning about the species I'm working with now. And I think being open to opportunities, I think, is the biggest. Take that chance and give the people at this companies a chance to meet you and know you and to show you that they value your perspective.
Oh, so many great stories and feedback. I just, wow, all of you. Thank you. So we have one question from Vicky, and this is for Beth. The question is, how does the role of women in ag industry vary around the world, since you've worked around the world? And then how can we stand out? And then to that, how have you balanced raising your daughters and thriving professionally?
Those are two really good questions. I think the first one, so I can kind of span almost a 30-year history of being in the poultry industry in the United States. And when I first started with the vaccine company, I was very young, didn't know much about the portfolio or about the industry. I had a better chance, I had better reception being a female poultry veterinarian if I went to Latin America or Asia than I did if I went to the South. So during that 2.5 years I worked for Solvay, I never went to Georgia, never went to Alabama. Now this is back in the 90s. Things have changed dramatically since then, but it was definitely a perception that I would be better. They'd be more cooperative working with international basically developing world countries, Mexico, but at that time it was pretty much Venezuela, Puerto Rico, et cetera. And, but I think that's changed a lot now. I think that there are so many more women that are both in veterinary medicine and poultry medicine and the food animal industry that I don't think that those issues, I don't think you'll face those same sort of biases today. I think it's really improved dramatically. I think the international, what helps with that is that you're viewed less as a female or, person of color than you are from the US and an expert because of the gravitas of the US knowledge base in the US, the size of the US industries. So I've never had any issues. I'd say probably the hardest uphill battle I had was I spent 2 weeks in Moscow one time teaching some coursework on USDA Food Safety Inspection Service courses, regulations to regulators in Moscow with another colleague of mine. And the first day they all sat in the audience and looked very glum and serious. And by the end of it, they were standing up and yelling in Russian and pointing fingers at us. But 3 days into it, we were all drinking vodka together and everything's fine. And about 6 months later, they came to the US and I hosted them for a tour around facilities and through Washington, DC. So a lot of it's just a fear of the unknown. And I think once you break through that barrier and become personalized with someone, have a personal relationship, it really changes that dynamic. As far as the second question, well, having a family and having a career, especially one that has a lot of travel, even going to professional meetings, of course, is challenging. And you have to cultivate a support network to be able to make that work. I think if you ask my daughters today, Did they enjoy their childhood with my frequent travel? They would say no. But as they're 23 and 32, as adult young women now making their way, I think it was a good role model for them about how you can juggle both a personal home life, family life, and work life. It's not, sometimes they clash. Sometimes it was hard. I, missed a lot of things, but you need supportive people that can help you kind of carry on keeping the home fires lit while you're off doing your thing. The advantages, it provided a good money for a good standard of living and education for both of them. So I think they fully appreciate that now that they're a little bit older.
I would just, echo your comments, Beth. I think I struggled more. I've been in the industry now for over 20 years in production and worked my way up as well, similar to Victor. It was much more challenging to be respected as a female, I guess, in the US than it's ever been for me across the country, world, I guess, And the more education I got, I don't know if it's because I was seen differently as an expert that helped change it. But I would say today, even in the US, things are much different than it ever used to be. And I would like to hopefully say some of those barriers are changing, but I think you may have a unique perspective if you guys are going to Midwest Animal Science, and Leanne Brooks will be speaking about women in animal nutrition from her perspective, being a young female coming out. So I wouldn't miss her talk, because I think since Beth, I think some of the challenges we still had in production ag, she may be even facing today. So it's interesting to hear different perspectives on that.
That's interesting, especially with two different species groups. I think with agriculture in general, it's historically been a good old boy network and very, very male dominated. But I think a lot of that's changed, over the years, because so many more women have come through the PhD programs, come through professional schools, and have worked in production and worked in meaningful roles in production. So I think it's a whole new generation that you're going to face. Some of the old guys still might be a little bit of a challenge gaining their respect and having them actually respect your skills. But I think the younger generations are much better. Plus, I believe, and this is might be totally off the top of my head, but I think a lot of the people that are in their 50s, 40s, 30s had mothers that worked and maybe had professional parents. So that makes a big difference for them too. Or have spouses that are professional, and that makes a huge difference, right, in their perspective.
I would like to add a comment regarding the balance, raising family and growing professionally. As a divorced parent raising my daughter, I can totally relate to that as well. It's been a big challenge, and being in positions that require quite a bit of traveling as well. So I absolutely see the value on developing and keeping that network support. It's fundamental. I also would say from my experience that there are companies that are a lot more friendly or more sensitive toward family than others. And so, finding that environment where people or family may come first, I think also makes a difference. At least it has been making a difference for myself.
Josh, do you have 3 you said?
I have 4 actually.
4.
So I can relate to the stresses of that. Although personally, my arrangement with my wife is very traditional in that she's the stay-at-home mom, at least until the kids are all old enough to be in school full time. But to the point about some employers being more supportive of family time and other demands. One of the neatest things I found when I joined BASF is that they have a program as part of their base benefits package where they will They have a service that they contract with that will, I believe it's up to 80 hours a year. They will pay to have a sitter come and watch your children when you're traveling. So as kind of a fill-in to enable you to go do that travel if your normal babysitter's not available or something else like that. And it's a really neat service because it will also help you find a sitter. So when I joined BASF, I had moved from Minnesota to New Jersey, didn't know anybody, didn't have a social network yet built up of friends and family and connections through schools and things like that. And it was really, really helpful because when I had to travel and my wife had to schedule doctor's appointments or other things, we could lean on this service to have somebody come and watch the younger ones for 4 hours while she goes to the doctor and the older ones are in school. And that's been super helpful. We don't use it as much now, obviously COVID, but even last couple of years, we've not needed it as much as our network has developed, but it was a godsend the first probably 2 or 3 years with BASF. And it's a national program. So if it's the kind of thing that you can ask for or ask about when you're doing the interview process, is this something that the company offers? Because that's super valuable in my opinion.
That's great. I wish I would have had that back in the day.
Well, I was going to say, I will be leading a group, and the Sunswine group may become a nonprofit if all goes well. But through ASAS, to kind of start that way, we are looking at a group of companies based on this symposium that will be offered in the spring for women in ag, but not just for women, but we are going to try to create a program that we will offer childcare at the meetings for working parents that need that. And we hope to branch that out more than just ASAS by forming the nonprofit. But there will be diversity in the Diversity Foundation ASAS has. Supposedly, hopefully that project and initiative will kind of go into that group, was what I was told, that they're hoping to position that. But I have DuPont, Evonik, a lot of other Cape Fear, different organizations really coming with me, Land O'Lakes, about how we can, what Josh talks about, and help support working parents. I understand that point. I don't have a network either, so I've had to pay people. We luckily have found friends with high school daughters or through care.com and things to have. My husband and I, specifically his work schedule, he's a police officer, so he works nights. We don't really like that. But when he works nights and I travel, it makes it easiest for us to pay somebody to come just spend the night with Arthur. And we're not having to find somebody to pick him up from daycare and feed him while my husband's still working during the days, because they're 12-hour shifts. And then also find somebody to come at 4:30 in the morning as my husband gets ready to go to work, for instance. So it's having that trade-off in conversations and partners, and single parents have it worse. So I feel for you, Victor, on that. But it's just finding that balance. And, I had a boss tell me my first 2 years of my job that I should not have kids in your first 2 years of your career. So I'm telling you, when I find European-based companies much more agreeable to families, women. So, there's still those challenges, but yeah, it's finding the right partner and working through that. So, but it can be possible. I've had to change my career. I'm not traveling the world, but I think that's probably better for me too, and healthier for my family. So you do have trade-offs, but as you said, be open-minded. So.
Yeah, I think those are good points. I was single for most of the child rearing window. And that is a challenge. I had to hire people that would come overnight, and either I had a woman who was retired and was trying to earn extra money. She was putting her daughter through, she wasn't quite retired, she was still working, but she was older, putting her daughter through college. And so she was happy to come stay with my 6-year-old overnight all week while I was gone. And then Maggie, and then she'd pack up. When I came home, she was ready to head out the door, and I was home for the weekend. It was a great arrangement for both of us. but it does take flexibility, and it takes really kind of doing some digging to find the right match. That's not at an exorbitant rate, not an au pair or something like that, that you're really kind of don't have the resources for necessarily.
Well, I did the au pair too, and that didn't work very well. So
Yeah.
don't recommend it.
I have a friend who did it too. It was a mixed bag.
Yeah.
But it is hard. It's definitely something that women, I think, shoulder more than men, although there are men, like you, Vic, that have that problem, have that situation. And it just adds an extra layer of complexity. At this point in my life, my girls are grown, but I'm also purposely don't have any pets and I don't have any plants, or just a couple, which could die if they need to. Because, it's just, I went through so many years of trying to juggle having everything kept alive at home while I was in, Eastern Europe for 3 weeks in a row or something. And so, it is, you're just going to pick your path, pick your way through the rocky path to see what works for you in your particular situation at the time.
And I think this goes into Vic's comment a little bit too about being exposed to diversity. So it's really funny. My husband does a lot of the sharing of that, and I travel, and who's the hardest on him at work and gives him the most crap? It's female police officers.
Oh, really?
It's the women that harass him a lot and not as supportive. So I find that really odd, the feedback he's gotten. And it's a tough environment because you got to be really kind of masculine in that job. And it's just, I'm blessed to have people and colleagues that are supportive of me in every company or across companies that understand and are supportive, and where my husband doesn't have that support network. So, our industry is blessed. It's a very family oriented agriculture. And I think that helps. So,
as we wait for more questions here, I would like to echo a comment from Beth, about being brave and just move and do it. And the comment I want to mention here is when it comes to precisely trying diversity or exposing yourself to a more diverse environment, one of the things that I see is there's always some resistance to, not make a fool of yourself in a situation. We certainly want to stand up, but not in a ridiculous way. But I would say just be brave and roll over. And at some point, we are going to make the ridiculous. We are going to do something weird, but just move ahead, enjoy the ride, and have the ability to laugh about yourself. I think that's part of the emotional IQ. And I will share an experience as well. Traveling to Brazil. We were visiting customers, and we were given only an hour for meeting with these customers. And in one case, there was a 45-minute meeting, and to me it was a little bit frustrating because I felt I had a lot to share, and actually flying all the way from US to Brazil, getting there, the jet lag and whatever, and then having just a short time. But anyway, however, they were very, very friendly. And so the first thing after greeting was taking us to the kitchen to drink coffee. And coffee was strong and hot. And I don't drink really hot beverage in general. So, I was taking my time. And at some point I thought, well, I actually going to save it for the time for the discussion. I will be doing more of the talking. So I could be, drinking my coffee over the discussion. But this small chat just kept going and going and going to nowhere. And eventually I ended my coffee and ended up with a very short time to do, the business discussion. The second time happened exactly the same way. And I actually grew quite a bit frustrated and told the local guy, the account manager that traveled with me, about my frustration. And he was very kind, but he said, if you don't drink coffee, maybe next time you can try water. and skip the social chat because they are waiting for you to finish your coffee. Oh gosh, I was. They were also frustrated with me by dragging the social chat for that. So, but anyway, that's at some point it's going to happen if you're exposed to that kind of diversity, and it just nothing happens. Just make a fun of it, and that's it.
It's like diversity of customs, right? There's such a change. I know if you ever go to Eastern Europe, for females, you can opt out of the vodka and drink wine. But this massive meal in the middle of the day with toast, everyone's drinking vodka and doing shots. And by the end of it, if you don't pace yourself, you were done for the day, and they go back to work. I don't know how they're used to it somehow. So there's some ways, ask your host, like your account manager or whatever, how do I get around this without imbibing half a bottle of vodka at lunchtime? With your
that is a very good point about diversity in culture and drinking. I have the very same problem. You can insult them by turning it down.
Mhm.
And I'm a lightweight, so a few times of working with my AB Vista guys and the amount that they can drink compared to what I can drink, and still function. And so it's like you said, Beth, talking to the local person to say, hey, and the Chinese are especially that way. They will at dinner really drink and get drunk, and it's a tough road to have that balance of not insulting people and culture, and respecting yourself too. So regardless of gender, that's culture there, I think.
Yeah. No, I'd say a warning, kind of a cautionary tale on the other side. We have some dietary patterns here that aren't that well accepted internationally, particularly veganism and the gluten-free. You will struggle finding foods to eat, and also people will think that you're a little bit on the odd side if you insist on these different foods when you're over in these other, especially Asian culture. But even I went to Spain not too long ago, and they just don't have gluten-free. They're a culture of eating crusty bread and lots of meat dishes and fish dishes. And so to find those kind of diets in those cultures, especially if you're in a rural area, you can expect to have a real challenge with that. So just food for thought, figure out how you're going to work around it if it's a critical issue to you.
I carry food with me just in case I can't eat some of the food.
Yeah, I carried food to Russia. Crackers and cookies, toilet paper. That was a long time ago.
Gosh, do you have any crazy stories like that?
Yeah, I do. Not necessarily at the level of Vic's. One of the best pieces of advice I got before I started doing international travel was from a U.S. colleague, was to ask whoever is bringing you in what the norms are, where the landmines are before you go. So that way you're prepared for things like they're not, you have to finish your coffee before you have the technical discussion, or worked with some customers in Latin America where a meeting time is a suggestion. It's both for the start time and the duration. It's not necessarily a guarantee. So if you have a meeting at 1 o'clock, don't be surprised if they're still somewhere else and you're just waiting for them to show up at 2, and then, or the meeting will change 2 or 3 times the day of because they're bouncing around. And so flexibility, I think, is a big part of accepting that something might change, something might not fit your initial expectation, and you just kind of have to roll with the punches a little bit. So I've been relatively lucky in not having having too many uncomfortable situations. But the other thing that I genuinely liked, particularly in working in the northern part of South America, is that flexibility on timeline can work in your favor. If you're coming in and having a conversation with somebody and you're booked for 30 minutes and you capture their interest, you can keep their attention for longer than the 30 minutes you were originally scheduled for without too much difficulty. And then you can get more impact from your visit. And a big part of preparing, I think, when you're leaving your home market is doing a little bit of research on the market you're going to, who the big players are, how does production there differ from what you're used to, diet types, management practices. Are barns electrified, right? Do they have electricity to control the lighting or not? Or is it based purely on ambient lighting? Do they have air conditioning or environmental controls? In many countries, poultry houses are not air conditioned at all. If it's 100 degrees and 90% humidity, those birds are just going to suffer. And how do they manage those birds differently? So you have to do a little bit of research if you want to avoid being caught by surprise, but you do need to be willing to laugh at yourself when you do get caught flat-footed, because everybody, how you handle that will tell whoever you're working with a lot about your character. And if you can roll with the punches, people are going to invite you back.
Exactly.
I think the most humbling experience I had was when I went to Greece. I was invited to the first Greece Pork Producers Conference, and I was speaking, and it was not really what I anticipated at all. The whole experience, Greece is a beautiful country, but the experience there to work, I wasn't, I don't reflect on the experience very well. The entire group, I was invited down to the reception and then the conference and stuff. It was all Greek. It was, the saying, it's Greek to me. Literally, it was Greek. The only distributors, really the only ones that spoke English. And it was quite humbling to have the table turned. I mean, most of Europe, everybody will speak English to you. And I now felt like what other people of different countries do when they come here and they can't speak the language and everybody's speaking English. And, I was always more, I think, accommodating person because I grew up very similar to Joshua, of having a diverse community, ethnic community, but liked different cultures and learning. But that experience in my career really realized that I need to do better to make everyone feel part of the conversation. And even if it's, I don't speak Spanish every day, but I say I speak Spanglish. So I try to, even if I can, in conversations there, use my Spanish when I can. And don't be afraid to learn languages. Most Europeans speak up to 7 languages. And we speak 1 or 2 here in the US. So, I think that's one experience to remember is how can you make everyone feel comfortable? And because they're quiet, maybe it's because they don't understand. So how can you accommodate that?
Active listening plays a big part in that too, when you're dealing with people whose English might not be perfectly fluent. When I was in a graduate student, I had a tendency to try to help, in my mind, help by helping them find the word. And some people are receptive to that, and some people it puts them off. So I found that a better default with people who are, trying to tell me a story and trying to find the words is to give them the time and the space to get there in their own time. Don't look at your watch, don't look around the room, keep focused on them, because at the end of the day, you want to hear what they have to say. And just because they can't get it out and find the words as fast as you're accustomed to, doesn't mean that they should be made to feel like there's something wrong with the rate with which they're communicating. Because I don't speak any other languages. I took Spanish in high school and I passed it barely. I failed French when I took it, despite having a tutor. I just don't have an efficiency or affinity for languages. But so if somebody's speaks 2 languages, even if they don't speak English horribly well, they're a leg up on me in that regard. And giving them the space and the time to communicate it out will make them feel more comfortable, put them at ease, and again, make them more interested and willing to have a conversation with you in the future. So.
I want to share one more comment, especially considering the audience that is at some point moving to the industry. Something that I found really interesting during my career has been that learning that respect and good manners are nothing related to cultural backgrounds, but they don't have to be related to cultural backgrounds. In other words, it doesn't matter where you come from, showing respect and good manners, it has to be a standard. And I think this is important for those joining the industry, because I was at one time in a weird situation where a rude person, even to the point to curse and shout people, was at some point trying to be explained as a communication bias due to cultural differences, but it is not, clearly. Not just because that was the consensus of the group, but clearly there was a HR activity that ended up in a disciplinary action. So when something like that happens, be clear, say something when it happens, and don't be confused. It's respect and good manners need to go beyond the cultural background everybody has.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
We got one quick question. Katie came in, or Catherine came in a little late on your explanation of what you did in Russia, Beth. But can you talk about your experience in Russia a little bit more? She kind of would like to learn more about working in Russia and the culture and stuff, I think.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Actually, I spent a couple weeks in Russia and a couple weeks in the Ukraine on a different trip, I went to the Ukraine a couple of times. I think the interesting thing is that now these are getting to be 15 years ago, and I'm sure Russia's changed somewhat, but when you go to Russia, if you don't speak, they can't really tell if you're Russian or not. So you're on the subway, going to the store or whatever. No one really takes a second look, but the minute that you open your mouth, they know you're American. And unfortunately, there's a lot of anti-American bias in those countries still, and a lot of kind of fear response. So it's, again, I think, to Vic's comments, and really both people, is that you've got to just go with the flow to some extent. You've got to be willing to let it roll off your back and just kind of bide your time, realize that you're in a really foreign country that's been in an adversarial relationship with the United States for a long time. Russians are ultimately Europeans, and they've got European architecture and European lifestyle, and then they went through the fall of the Soviet Union. Well, they went through communism first, and then the fall of the Soviet Union, and they're very distressed. Those are both very distressed countries today, but they're very proud people. I was working in Russia, I worked with the Ministry of Agriculture that was responsible for rewriting the Russian regulations for food safety for poultry production after the fall of the Soviet Union, which occurred in 91. So I was there even 15 years post that window, but they were still just trying to reconstruct a lot of their legal system. And we didn't do a lot. We mostly run auditorium style and went to dinners and things. A little bit of touring of some ag facilities, but not much. The when I worked for USAID, then I was in the Ukraine and worked with the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Health. And we went out to the production facilities, in particular ones that were the collective farms, and met with those producers, looked at processing facilities, met with a lot of ag people. It's an interesting culture. It's kind of a whole Russian Soviet Union mentality across all those countries. Armenia, I was in Armenia and Georgia, Azerbaijan. They're hard to penetrate. So they're hard to penetrate because they're very fearful of strangers, really, and very closed. But once you get inside that, they're really warm and lovely people. And it just is a matter of, like I said, good manners, being polite, go with the flow, don't try to control the situation, unless it's dangerous, of course, and just be willing to absorb new experiences. and let that barrier break down through familiarity and build trust. And then actually they're funny people. They're really interesting, and a lot of fun to be with them, and really roll out the red carpet for you, food wise. You know, I mean, I had sturgeon grilled on a wonderful restaurant off some nice big river. I don't know which one it was. I mean, it was just like in an old world, kind of a Russian log building. It was really, there's a lot of really wonderful things about those countries and a massively long history. So
But
I'm not
I
sure
would
if that's what you know, but
Yeah, and just some closing comments on that as well. I had a au pair from the Ukraine, and it was very overwhelming for her to come to the US. So if you're hosting them in a more developed, I guess, country or different country, they're not used to the choices we have. And even working with colleagues in the Ukraine, it's lots of choices, and that is very difficult for them to navigate. Lots of options from food, dining, to buying clothes for her. But I noticed that even working with some of them, that it was very limited. And they seem to function better with limited like products. They don't need 20 different enzymes. They, want to focus more on a narrow type of product line, and that helps them with their culture or the way they are in their country. Because it seems to me, of working with them as professional colleagues, but then also having an au pair live in my home, that can be very overwhelming, the American culture and of choice. So
that's a good observation, actually. I know when the Russian group came here for a visit, they all brought extra suitcases or duffel bags and wanted to go to Walmart. They were desperate to go to Walmart and buy, to take back with them. So it's a different culture and a different economic system, and it's a different mentality of people too. But they are very lovely people once you get through that initial barrier. So it's not something to be afraid of. Just be aware that they are not going to be open arms when you first arrive, and it takes a little bit of time to prove that you're safe for them.
any last minute, Joshua, Vic, feedback before we go?
I guess one kind of quick comment is that when we're talking about diversity and people having a different background and things like that, you get a lot of that in the US too. And so don't forget that either. So like in the Dakotas, we've got the Hutterite colonies, which are kind of a German offshoot, communes basically, but they're a huge part of turkey production. And the culture of the poultry industry in the kind of the Eastern Seaboard is different from the culture of the swine industry in the Midwest. And so even within the US, cultural sensitivity and awareness of the differences can do you in good stead just working domestically here. We tend to think of diversity in outside terms, but there's a lot of diversity in this country too. And so yeah, just as one more thing to think about.
Very good points of working both with the Amish and the Hutterites in my career, and some of those cultures even in the US that aren't as open for females, for experts. So good points. Vic, anything?
Oh, that's it.
Beth, any last minute?
No, I appreciate the opportunity. I hope this is helpful. I know it's a great discussion, and I'm really interested to learn from all of you also. So thank you so much. It was really great.